Okay, welcome everybody. And we're so excited. Kelsey and I are excited you're able to join us this afternoon for systems level coaching for state success. So you will have myself, Kat Rollerson from Florida PBIS at the University of South Florida with Kelsey Schmitz from the University of Washington. We were just talking about how beautiful it is, and you'll see that in her background. So we're happy you're able to join us. The handouts are in the polls, or excuse me, the handouts are in the files section. I'm going to show you that in just a second. So we're going to both show our camera and show you our faces while we're talking, and then take a break when we're not, just so we don't overwhelm you on the screen. But Brian, I thought, did a great job in the intro section of reviewing some of these slides. So we want to just give you some reminders of those. First is our virtual forum expectations and what that looks like for being responsible, respectful, and safe. And we have tried to uphold for our expectation for presenters as well. You do have a personalized schedule, so hopefully you found this session with no trouble today and we're able to click on that. We get the power, or our tech support, who is Dawn Kincaid today, got to start the session for us. So every session should start for you. And then session details, as you saw, you can interact for what I was just mentioning, the chats, polls, people, and files. So we do have some polls for you today. They're just open-ended to be able to give you a chance to share some ideas. And Kelsey will ask you some of those questions a little later in the session, but feel free to interact there as well as the Q&A section, and Dawn will help us keep track of that in the chat for us today. And the copy of the handout is also in the files for you. I just went ahead of this slide. I apologize. I'm very bad about doing that, but the chat feature is welcome to use. You're welcome to use the chat feature. You're welcome to use the Q&A under polls. And then when we prompt you, you're welcome to use the open-ended polls that we provided for you today. Stay with us. Don't navigate away. We want to keep you here for our session to go through some what we hope will be helpful information for you as state implementers. So try to stay in that live session. If you do navigate away, you can get back. We don't lock you out. So just a reminder of that. And we're just joking about this, but it is important. Use your help desk. So if any problems keep going that we can't problem solve, use that help desk feature. They also offer across all the session in this organization some scaffolded questions for you. So you are welcome to think through those questions in this session. And like I said, Kelsey will give you a little bit more to think through specific to some of the content and critical elements we're going to be going over today around collaboration at the state level. Okay, so last of our forum introduction slides is our objectives. And hopefully that's why you're here today joining us, that you want to know a little bit about some of the research and backing of systems coaching. What are some of those critical features we look at the state level for being ready for change? You want some resources, hopefully, for helping you in your state coaching role, and want to see some examples. So I will be talking through the intro part. Sometimes not the most exciting part. I'll try to do my best there, but what is the research behind systems coaching and what helps us at the state level, along with do a little bit of modeling from our state level project as a resource to support that in our state. Kelsey will take that a step further with her exemplar story of regional collaboration in her state. And really does a great job of modeling regional collaboration, use of resources and state coaching, along with layering on that school-based mental health approach and an integrated systems framework. So hopefully lots of helpful content for you. But last but not least, we want an opportunity for you to kind of reflect and apply to what you're working in, your context at a state level. So a little bit on for the intro, a little background systems coaching. And systems coaching is fairly new in our field of research. There's a lot more out there on instructional or content coaching at the 101 level. So we just wanted to give, and I do apologize, this will be my wordiest. So when I have lots of words, I like to use animation, especially because we are in a time right now of trying to offer short chunks of information, doing a lot of virtual learning. So what is systems coaching? And just unpacking some parts of that definition, it's focused at the coordinated capacity of groups, or for our context of work, for teams. We're working at that team level to foster capacity, which is different than the heavier and more established historical background of that one-on-one or content coaching, that instructional coaching field, but it's gaining a lot of evidence in the last couple of years. So we're looking at teams, first of all, and then implementation fidelity being a main target of what we work on with teams and establishing their capacity to build that fidelity. And then we're having to do that while also keeping in context the systems factors. So for example, at the school level, we're looking at multiple things going towards school reform. Even at the state level, we're looking at multiple policies around school reform, integrating in certain curriculums and instructional practices. So having to stay focused on the implementation fidelity of that evidence-based practice while we're looking at all those multiple parts. So systems is challenging, but we are talking about doing that capacity of groups or teams. That's where we're gonna live in this session. There's 3 critical functions, and we did, anytime we see a link on a slide, we embedded the resource in that hyperlink for you. So when you download the handout, you should be able to access any of those resources through the embedded link. If you run into any challenges with that, you are welcome to put that in the chat, and I can add the resource to our files for you. But 3 key functions that we know what systems coaching refers to. We're looking again at that evidence-based intervention fidelity. So when we talk about professional development, we're not just doing spray and pray, one-stop shop training. We're doing follow-up coaching and job embedded coaching at the state district level. That's at that district, state and district team level. At our schools, that's directly to our schools and educators along to our classrooms and our students, that implementation cascade piece that I'll show you in just a second. And so that's the evidence-based intervention fidelity. That's the how. We're operationalizing the what is it and how does it work in our context, along with what was nicely talked about by Ken in the intro section. How does that fit our context? So when we train Tier 1 PBIS, we don't just train the elements, we train you to take those elements and make them contextually fit your setting. And that's what makes it that cultural responsive piece. The second bullet's there, we look at what we're doing to coach. So what are the action steps? And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. What are we doing in that coaching process? And monitoring that we're doing it as intended to promote that practice and evidence-based intervention fidelity maintains. And Kent mentioned that at the beginning, our PBIS is a framework, multi-tiered systems is a framework. So coaching that framework to implement practices as we go, and I'll kind of wrap up with some key points around that before I transition to Kelsey. The last point is around that blueprint. I'll show that in just a second. Those executive functionings, do implementers have what they need? So that organizational systems to promote judgment and sustainability, simply put, do the implementers have what they need to do this? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. So why is that relevant to what systems coaching is and what those functions are? This was mentioned and showed a lot from the Returning to School After Crisis, and I'll show you that resource a little later. We are working with an implementation cascade to make this effective. So those of you listening at that state level, like myself, I work on a state project with a lot of my state project friends and collaborators. And we work with that leadership team to then establish training, coaching, evaluation supports to our districts across our state or local regions if you don't use that terminology or don't have districts. The district team then provides that same level of support and those drivers to support schools. Schools provide it to classrooms to promote that student growth. And then one of the most essential features to this is there's that bi-directional communication between those layers of the cascade. And I'll show ours as an example in a little bit. But what makes this better and that continuous improvement approach is that we're using that bi-directional communication as we go through feedback. So that what it is, what we're trying to establish, and how it fits in the context of our state level work is that implementation cascade support. A little bit more background or introduction to the topic is that it's kind of this beautiful relationship. If you think of it like a marriage or a healthy relationship that you have with someone, we need 2 things. We need this readiness to change, and that's what's on the right. We know from some research that we've got to have these critical elements for systems change to be present before we know that coaching to sustain that change will be effective. So can we, for example, verbalize and develop a common vision, focus, why we're doing the work we are? That was really well modeled this morning, or excuse me, not this morning, it's the afternoon. That was very well modeled this afternoon on the session about what our key messages are. Kelsey does a great job of modeling those key messages with her regional collaboration in the later part of the session, as well as some of those key messages we use when we integrate school-based mental health as part of ISF. But at that systems level, do we have a commonly defined vision, mission, and focus that then drives and supports that focus on schools, or at the state level, that focus for district supports? Can we keep good relationships present with those that we coach and support? And that's built on that trust and that mutual respect and responsibility that we have in the change process. So for example, at the state level, when I go in a district, I'm partnering with that district. We're in this together. It was just a great district yesterday. And I say the statement all the time, like, I want them to be successful. That's why we do the work we do, just like they want their schools to be successful. And we all want those outcomes for students and families and to engage them in that decision making. And number 4, expert problem solver and database decision making. That is a universal practice for any kind of coaching. But we have to be able to use those data to drive our decisions and be good at using them to drive what we do in implementation goals. And last but not least, we just talked about the impact of coaching being part of effective professional development, but those are the features that we need to see for change to even happen, for us to be ready for that change, and for it to sustain. So to connect that to some resources, we use a lot of, and I know other projects at state levels and leadership teams do, district readiness and planning resources. So I embedded our site if you want to take a look at those. But to some of the things we know have to be established, we use some tools to guide our district teams and our states in that readiness feature of it and before we engage in professional development. On the other side, I said it's a perfect marriage or a perfect relationship. Readiness for change along with some skill sets. So we have to have this interdependent skill set, and that comes from a systems coaching paper that is actually getting to be fairly old now, but had some really good information as far as the skills that we need for integrated coaching. We know we're in a time where we're having to do integrated between social emotional skills, behavioral skills, and academic skills now more than ever. So when we talk about integrated coaching, there's 7 domains of skills we need in these leadership teams. So not one person has to have all those skills, but we have to have this interdependence of our teams, what we mean by capacity in order to make this change sustain. And later I'll reference, we did take some of that integrated skills and re-message and package that you're welcome to take a look at in terms of the PBIS framework and how we support across our cascade. So when we look at the 7 skills, none of them are shockers, right? As far as the skills that we need. Back to relationships, that's essential in terms of systems coaching across that cascade. I always think of, I am a trained school psychologist by training, and I will never forget in grad school, we had to do a coded interview when you were doing collaboration or communication with people that you were doing consultation with, we had to code our statements. It's always painful to listen to yourself, but when you are able to look at your statements and the way you use statements for effective listening, for active engagement, empathy, it was really telling of the style you use when you communicate with people. Are you really actively listening to them? Are you modeling respect in your communication? And it seems like one we always say, oh yeah, we have that, but it's a really essential feature to good system relationships. The rest of them, we've already mentioned the database decision making as being an essential feature for readiness and sustaining. The readiness, the interpersonal skills, that comes back to facilitating teams. Whether that's through professional development or team meetings, ongoing team meetings as job embedded coaching. And we have to be able to do that with those effective interpersonal skills. And then number 3, I wanted to mention content knowledge. Sometimes I feel like we have to be experts in all, but that we have in that interdependent teams that we include and engage or expand our teams to include multiple systems of content knowledge. So not one person has to be an expert in all, but what does that content knowledge look like? And so you see some of those examples listed. And then a little bit about professional learning, which we're going to walk through with the quick example from our state project, and then also from Kelsey's example. And I already mentioned it in the last slide, but just that we're evaluating, are we making an impact? And I'll just share briefly our logic model of how we do that at a state level, but keeping that in mind that we don't just provide those state supports at a state level, but we evaluate the impact that's making across that cascade. So that leads us to the blueprint, which probably everyone listening has seen or heard talked about, those drivers that we're looking for implementation. Some of the brief intro research that I gave you around system coaching really supports the blueprint areas, along with that one more research piece that I'll mention after this. But we know it's essential that we have good leadership team. That's why we aim at those leadership teams at every layer of the cascade, or our regional leadership teams in some cases at the state level. But we're looking at those executive functionings. That's back to, do the implementers have what they need? Are we engaging multiple partners and collaborating? Again, Kelsey does a great job of talking about this, keeping those partnerships with those that we should, to do a good job at the state level for connecting the dots and integrating multiple policies, multiple data systems, things that we need to know about at that state level to support districts. Funding and alignment, we are at a time right now where lots of funding is coming down, and I'll wrap us up with that. Those considerations around keeping your eye on sustaining good implementation of what you've started versus getting distracted by that shiny new thing. And then the policy piece I mentioned a little bit, but we always have changing policy and guidance that's going to come through our state level. So keeping that state policy guiding in districts in terms of their framework, again, I mentioned that PBIS is a framework, versus seeing as an isolated challenge, because that tends to drive our compliance mindset. And then on the bottom, we mentioned that in the cascade. So our role at the state level is supporting training, coaching, evaluation, along with those executive functioning, so that we can have some local implementation demonstration districts for us at the state districts and schools that we can highlight and promote that visibility. So along with the blueprint, just want to support, we have lots of research to support us at that school level for what we know impacts systems change. Another new area, a field of work and research, is those district factors that really support the blueprint areas. And one that's been presented before, so I won't spend a ton of time on it, but did want to mention, was by some of our colleagues in the state project, and looking at just correlational things for when we have districts that we're implementing with really high fidelity, but also with good outcomes, because we want to see high fidelity with those good student outcomes. What were the things that they said were really important at the district level? And naturally, we saw 8 themes, and I'm actually going to put them all up. They supported, if not enhanced, some of the examples of our blueprint areas that I just reviewed as correlational things that really help them be successful. One is that primary contact for communication. We call that the district coordinator in our state. Our state level also uses primary contacts for different departments and bureaus. So that idea of a primary contact that then can be a part of the district team that can share and integrate that information. Coaches at that local level so that they can sustain that work after we have face-to-face training. They can keep that work going in job embedded practice. Then I wanted to highlight 3 and 4. So we said district team is important, and this just supplements that a little bit more. Particular to district teaming, some things were reinforced that I've already mentioned, just wanted to bring them home again, that collaboration, various perspective or stakeholder voice coming to the table, that we're integrating policy and practice. For example, that integrated approach of academics, social-emotional, behavioral, keeping that within our MTSS framework was a really essential sub-theme indicated here. So when we're messaging and when we're working with teams, fostering that integrated approach is noted to be really helpful, as is our blueprint areas of policy and alignment. And then our district team activities, structure to that district team. So when we're coaching those teams, that we're looking at structural supports for them, database decision-making supports, that goes with the other themes. And these are in order of how popular or how highlighted those themes were. 3 and 4 actually tied there. So just want to mention that supplemental support for that district or that teaming importance when we're thinking of state level support to district teams. And then, I said it's so important, and then I left it off our slide. I'm sorry about that. So communication skills. It's essential that we have those relationship or interpersonal skills to keep with our implementers across the cascade. And the arrow just highlights what I'd already mentioned about that was a sub-theme that was really important. And again, Kelsey's example of that integrated systems framework of driving it home even more with social, emotional, behavioral skills being a forefront focus with school-based mental health and PBS. So that was a little support for the district team. Before I show our quick example and transition to Kelsey, taking the leadership team focus a little bit more explicitly out. And this was talked about again very well in the first opening session today, and then highlighted by some great district presenters in those videos and in our live presenter. What's your common vision and mission? Can we illustrate that? Can we share that? Or can we establish that? And can we share it? We want it to be public. We want it to drive what we do. I know sometimes the hardest part is coming to agreement on that vision and mission. But when we're working on regional collaboration and collaboration among multiple bureaus or state departments, just like we do with district departments, what's that common team purpose and vision? Because that's going to drive the outcomes we hope to see and that we're establishing and maintaining and meeting those outcomes through goals, along with then driving what is our implementation focus areas, which of course our blueprint supports. But those executive functioning areas are always floating around these 3 areas, and we consider them and drive that in implementation planning. A couple, and I know the presenters mentioned that in the first session, the DSFI or the state tool was mentioned this morning, and I'll let Kelsey talk a little bit about that. I know they use that a lot in her exemplar, as well as they got good at chunking that some because it is very lengthy. So how do we implement tools like that to drive our decision making in these times when people are feeling a little overwhelmed and inundated because of the pandemic factors? So just some measures there. These are kind of universal. They go through every level of the cascade, state, district, school. So quickly, my example from our state project, just to model some of those concepts. We have established mission as a project. We are focused on that mission. Everything we do is going to be surrounding that mission and vision. We have a mission that we publicize everywhere in our annual report. We share it. We make sure it's agreed upon. Our directors do a great job partnering with our state to show that's agreed upon by our state funders and our state departments that we collaborate with. Then we have a little bit, I'm going to unpack what we do to support that vision mission. Here is our cascade. We mentioned the state cascade, so just the visual of how we share that. And then the 7 skill sets that we mentioned were supported in a white paper. We have rebranded those, and we have a visual we use that's on the right corner there for you that packages those skills in terms of implementing that PBIS multi-tiered framework. So that's a link for you at the bottom if you want to see that. We also have some colleagues talking about that. I know in B2 at that district level, if those of you who work at the state would like to hear a little more about that at district level. And then I didn't want to forget to mention that bidirectional piece. I mentioned that's really important for continuous feedback, continuous improvement of our approach. So to go a little bit further, I'm going to show you a logic model. If you don't love logic models, I think you should. I'm also a little bit of a data nerd, but I think they are very helpful for illustrating and messaging, along with filling in some of the pieces that you do at the state level. And I can't even take credit for ours at all. We have a fabulous evaluation leadership group that helps guide some of our decisions around this logic model, and as well as engaging our project voices in that process. So simply put, to unpack where you see the blue arrow, what are we going to do to support that mission and vision? What are our inputs broadly? Collaboration, again, those relationships are first and foremost with all of our key stakeholder partners, our state project partners. We have other projects that we support some of our state goals of our Department of Ed that we try to partner with when that makes sense as far as going into districts. We, of course, partner with our national center. In fact, our directors are pretty highly involved in that, and we support some of those work groups when we can. And then we are committed to research and evidence-based practices within our framework, keeping our expertise at that school-wide PBIS and various tiers as part of school-wide PBIS so that we can provide effective training and TA to our districts that we serve. And then the bottom I wanted to mention, because it's been especially essential in this last year now too, with the pandemic present, but technology usage. So thinking of how, like, I love the way they use some videos this morning to have some presenters be present or their voice be present versus having them be live. But whether that's a database decision-making tool for districts, like a RTIB database that you can see on our website, or it's the way that we provide TA, like a Canvas module that you can self-pace through versus me giving you live training, or how we gather your feedback. So we use Qualtrics as a way to gather feedback that's in that last example of inputs. And then we also use a dashboard, a Power BI, like other districts use Swiss and PBIS apps, or excuse me, other states. And that's some essential inputs for us to help support our district implementers and what they need, as well as message some of, are we doing what we hope to achieve as a state project, and that we can message those to our collaborating partners. So that's the inputs piece. It then goes over to our right about what does that look like logistically for our activities. And then next would be our goals, and using those SMART goals. We are all engaged in identifying those goals and tracking and setting where we want to see ourselves. And the last step is, of course, just like I showed in that one slide that was universal, what are our outcomes we hope to see? And sometimes when we identify an outcome, we may have to spend some time on how we're going to measure it, but still put it down and start to problem solve. There could be a way to measure it that we haven't thought about. For us, that was district engagement. We use a district engagement rubric. For others, that may be a different method. But that was one we wanted to be a central outcome. So we had to find a way to measure that. And then you see at the bottom, everything is driven on the logic model by our mission or vision, just like we coach districts and schools to do. And the last pieces of the example are, again, evaluating what you do. We mentioned that as a core feature and skill of systems coaching. Again, can't take credit for it, but it's absolutely beautiful. It's on the national site as well as our site if you want to look at it. It is on our main page that you have at the end of the presentation. But we have a great evaluation team and leadership that helps do an annual evaluation report each year that not only does examination of these outcomes that you see paired with fidelity to give us some of those walk-away statements that you see there in our takeaways, but also looks at our inputs. So when we're evaluating what we do to inform continuous improvement, one piece, I just pulled this one because it's very relevant to our state. We're not just doing initial tier 1 training, for example, we're doing a lot of retraining. That's kind of our context right now. And you want to know what context we're implementing. And statewide, we are doing, as this data shows, a lot of retraining or supplemental training, things like enhanced supports, integrating in restorative practices, for example, classroom boosters at those big 5 or essential 5 of classroom integrated into tier 1. So taking charge, and we look at our tier 2 and 3 supports in the same way. I just pulled the tier 1 as one example. That helps inform us as we're making changes to our professional development to meet the needs of our district implementers. And the other 2 pieces I want to mention are, and Kelsey will talk a little bit about both of these too, but not only just sharing what we do. So that busy visual or infographic is just what all those pieces are other than training. We do some ongoing TA chats as job embedded coaching. We do a lot of things on our websites for virtual skill modules. So tracking what we offer in addition to trainings, but also is that training making impact with our TA support? So we survey that primary contact I mentioned, our district coordinators, to see if we're meeting their needs as the primary contact along with the district leadership team. So training satisfaction in terms of knowledge building, is it meeting that knowledge? Is it meeting objectives? Is the information relevant and useful to their context? And do they feel that they can take that training with our TA and support and go forward to implement that? And the bottom graph is just another example. And again, I tried to pull the things that are a little unique in the evaluation plan as far as implementing that logic model. Of all the resources we provide, we want to keep that focus. So what are those resources that are most helpful to our district stakeholders? And making sure those are available and improved as we see fit from some of that evaluation data. So that's an example of just using data and annual evaluation to make sure we're meeting the needs of the district implementers. And the last thing I was going to leave you with before I hand it over to our exemplar story today is, and Kent did a great job. He actually had a beautiful slide with the visuals on it, but I'm using this example because our director, Heather George, did a nice job with our district coordinators recently. That's our statewide network, where she kind of emphasized some of those critical messages. Again, you saw the words come through in the chat. We're feeling inundated. We're feeling exhausted. People are feeling challenged. Keep in really essential messages and those key vision missions has never been more important. So I referenced a little bit earlier in the cascade that returning to school, which was offered and talked about a little bit last forum, but pulling some of those key messages out that are some of the same that we know, but also a little enhanced. For example, that prioritization of equity along with that MTSS being supports for all students. When we're thrown lots of things, like mental health education or prevention of substance abuse, that MTSS framework, our PBIS framework, is the piece that we want to keep to and hold that we can engage for all students, families, and educators. And we want to differentiate those supports. So we know there's more need now than ever, but that's why we're implementing MTSS as our foundation. We're using that to differentiate supports, and we'll continue to do that to promote those equitable outcomes. He had a beautiful visual of the student growth. Here we have the verbal message, but that student growth is going to be the central piece to our decision making. We want to be driven by outcomes and making sure those outcomes are equitable. And along with that, keeping that we're implementing effective, relevant practices and keeping it small in numbers. So don't go away from your PBIS framework implementation and MTSS because we have shiny new thing comes in with funding or it's a catchphrase of the day. Put it in the framework is essentially the message. And when I transition to Kelsey, that's perfect. Talking about integrating, aligning, connecting practices. Although that work is difficult, it'll help us stay the course and keep on what we've been doing well versus kind of fragmenting our focus along with like the logic example I just shared. And then I'm going to put the last couple up here. Just keep that focus there as new funding sources come down, as new programs or tools come at you. Use that data for decision-making, screening, progress monitoring, promoting fidelity and outcomes. to stay focused on those systems data practices with our equity piece. So again, and I also shared that one because that was an example of a document with some common messages where 4 of 5 centers had collaborated on that. So that they came to agreement on some of those common messages is always pretty powerful. And then last year, Never Alone, there is tons of resources for you at the state level. They are coming out quickly and trying to stay relevant with the implementation of the state level along with our district level. So a couple are listed that you may have already heard of there. But they kind of borderline on that integrating in some expanding our approach to include those social, emotional, behavioral pieces. For example, that staff wellness that was mentioned and is at the focus of some sessions I know tomorrow. That's been really big in our district implementation context. So using our PBIS framework to promote staff wellness. The other 2 on the end on the right, we know lots of funding is coming in. So keeping that eye on the prize and focus of the systems that we know work and what we've been implementing, supporting and adding and enhancing our framework versus diverting to a new shiny thing is one state challenge I think we always have, along with our districts that they have. So that is my wrap up. What I'm going to do now is the pleasure of introducing Kelsey. So she is going to be talking, taking that modeling a little bit further of a regional collaboration project in her neck of the woods, which is actually beautiful. You can see from the visuals, and really driving point those piece of common messages and collaboration. So Kelsey, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to stop my camera now, if that's okay.
Thanks, Kat. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Always important to check that. Yeah, so I think this is where you kind of left off with talking about new funding is a good transition for me to talk a little bit about what's been happening in the Northwest region of the United States. I'm Kelsey Schmitz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you from Lacey, Washington, which is on the ancestral land of the Nisqually tribe. I am the Director of Training and Technical Assistance at the University of Washington SMART Center. SMART stands for School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center. I'm excited to scroll through the attendees and see some friends and colleagues near and far, sort of sitting here wishing that we could all be in person together. But we'll take this as a next best option. So thanks again to Kat and really all of her colleagues at the Florida PBIS Center. They have certainly been a source of much professional development and professional growth over my career. And I just want to make sure they are acknowledged for the work that they have been doing. So for the rest of our time together, you're going to hear about an example of one region in the US and how a group of organizations have been collaborating to build capacity for implementation of school mental health and PBIS, otherwise known as the Interconnected Systems Framework. And just like it says there on this slide, you know, we have the option to silo new initiatives or existing initiatives versus investing in collaboration, expansion, and enhancement. And we went that second route. So we're going to demonstrate today is how we invested in collaboration, expansion, and enhancement to really expand our reach to more of the workforce. So this isn't a presentation that's going to go into much depth about the Interconnected Systems Framework. There are several other sessions where you'll be able to get some really good information on ISF, but I just want to level set as this is really the work that we have been collaborating around is building capacity for the Interconnected Systems Framework. Which is the deliberate application of the multi-tiered PBIS framework for all of our social emotional behavioral interventions. It's about aligning all of those social emotional behavioral related initiatives through one system at the state and regional level and at the district and school level. And really strongly emphasize the active participation of family and youth as a central feature of the Interconnected Systems Framework. So on the next slide, you'll see earlier this week, there's been an update on the mental health and social emotional well-being page on PBIS.org. So this is just one graphic that you'll see, but if you go to that website, you will find just a wealth of information, monographs, tools and resources, but really talking about why we use the interconnected systems framework to address mental health in schools. And I want to focus on first on that center column. The key messages are that we're working to move away from co-location, fragmentation, and silos to a single system of delivery. And really, when it comes to mental health, moving away from the way that we evaluate and monitor individuals receiving school mental health, access is not enough. We can't just count the number of kids receiving mental health services. It's not something we would ever do for our academic interventions. So we really have to focus on outcomes. The third key message is that mental health is for all. When we're talking about mental health, we're talking about not only students, but our staff and our families. And then the final key message is that the multi-tiered system of support is essential to install systems to support school mental health. And we use those enhanced features such as integrating our teams. So our clinicians are on our teams across all three tiers. We're expanding database decision-making to bring in not just school data, but community data as well. And then collaboratively, we're working together to select and implement a single continuum of interventions. We're also doing comprehensive screening so we can identify students and get them early into supports, as well as focusing on that ongoing coaching piece that Kat talked a lot about. So on the next slide, I just want to shift a moment to tell you about the center that we're a part of and how we leverage this new center to foster our regional alliances and collaborative efforts. So in late 2018, SAMHSA funded 10 regional mental health technology transfer centers, as well as a school mental health supplement for each center. So these 10 regional centers and 2 population-focused centers, along with a network coordinating office, form the national MHTTC network. And the purpose includes disseminating and implementing evidence-based practices for mental health issues in the workforce. So what I want you to take away from this slide is we're going to be talking about who are our critical friends, who are our critical partners. If you aren't already connected with your regional MHTTC, this is your prompt to do so. And you can do that by going to the mhtttcnetwork.org website, and it should pick up your IP address and tell you, give you a link to your center. What's great about this network is that you can even go outside of your region and take advantage of the resources and the tools and the trainings from other centers. And as we heard this morning, we've got folks here outside of the United States. And so these things are certainly available for anyone to access. So the next slide tells a little bit more about our Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. So we support the mental health workforce in Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. And while we have a core grant that focuses across the lifespan, our school mental health supplement is really focusing on the school mental health workforce to provide direct training and TA on the implementation of mental health services in schools, to use this funding to build infrastructure and create learning opportunities or learning communities, to support educational leaders to promote mental health for all, and finally to foster regional alliances and collaborative efforts. So there's some information on this page about how you can access some of our resources, and I'll be giving you some links later on as well. So moving to the next slide, one of those alliances that has formed across several Northwest states and includes guidance and support from the National Center on PBIS. So we're a newer collaboration, but each of us have been involved in PBIS efforts for many, many years. So I want you to take a moment. We are usually doing this presentation together, but if you'll notice some of the names and faces on this slide, you'll probably recognize them across multiple different presentations. So I'm grateful that they trusted me to represent their work and our collective work. This is a truly amazing group of chicken farmers, hikers, Pez collectors, horse riders, coffee drinkers, and barbecue lovers. And I've just appreciated the opportunity to learn and work alongside these amazing professionals. So on the next slide, this is something that Kat had mentioned, and I think really our vision in thinking about the symmetry of process with those common implementation drivers along the implementation cascade through capacity building. On the next slide, it gives really just talks about how we have used our Northwest regional collaboration of state agencies, universities, national, regional training and TA providers, and other professional associations to not only build, but really strengthen that single system of supports along the cascade by aligning our messages and our resources for stakeholders across all of our organizations, by really looking at how we can combine and leverage local, state, and federal funding sources, by co-sponsoring, co-presenting, co-branding professional development events and resources, and then really focusing and emphasizing that research, policy, practice, feedback loop, so that we can build capacities within our communities and address school mental health workforce gaps, as well as improve the integration and the coordination of school mental health services to inform policymaking. And as we're all well aware, as the pandemic unfolded, as a result of this strong collaboration that was built, we were able to pivot, love that word, to pivot very quickly because we'd already established these partnerships and collaborations to provide some high quality professional development. So when we think about our key message, we have a shared valued outcome. So on the next slide, my colleague, Dr. Jessica Swain-Bradway, talks about, us having the same capacity, or the same contingency, which is building capacity or working ourselves out of a job through the alignment of our vision, our mission, and our goals, and ensuring that the accuracy of the information that's shared to replace any contraindicated practices, to really focusing on that dosage of information to expand our reach, which in turn reduces the isolation of resources and funding and opportunities, and increases accountability because we're promoting and supporting the use of multiple shared tools and evaluation timelines. So I want to take a moment right now for you to consider some of these questions. And Kat, this is, I think, our opportunity to prompt people for the poll. Is that right?
That is true. So the first three questions you see listed are included in the polls section. And I also wanted to take a second. I apologize for not doing that before you started, Kelsey. If there's any chat questions, Dawn, that we need to address, or are we okay to keep going? Okay. So I guess, Kelsey, yes, to your point, the first three questions are in the polls. As Kelsey talks through, they're open-ended. You're welcome to go ahead and answer some of those polls. And then she'll have a slide at the end where we can debrief or talk some more about what some of your ideas are there after she shares some of hers.
Yeah, so just take a moment, if you will, to share any reflections on these questions. Who are your current critical friends and partners in this work? And who might be missing? So we have a list of examples there. How do you establish core messages with your partners? And how can you seek new funding with partners or leverage funding in existing work? And then the last question, how can you collaborate to extend your reach, deepen your content, and extend your impact? So as we go through these next examples, just some questions for you to consider, populate some things in chat so we can really hear other ways, because I know there is so much of this work happening, around the world. And we'd just like to hear some of those examples. All right, so on the next slide, we're going to talk about some of these examples out of some of our Northwest states. We're going to share how we've leveraged regional collaboration, some examples of some co-sponsored, co-branded, co-presented activities, and some ways that we are co-mingling funds. The benefits of having aligned core messages, and then questions finally to consider when seeking more collaborative efforts. So this next slide, a lot of things, a lot of words here on this slide, but this is just the result of us working collaboratively over the last few years to host and co-host and co-sponsor multiple events across the Northwest. John, I think you're unmuted.
Nothing's working. So you guys.
All right, we got that covered. So I think one of the things I want to highlight back on that slide with the list of examples is that first one. And I briefly mentioned it as I got started, but one of the benefits of an existing collaboration is that we were able to quickly meet as the pandemic unfolded and think about a way that we could create sort of one way to of how people are collaborating with their critical friends. I love to see that somebody's mentioned MHTTC. So these are great. It's just great to hear how you're doing this collaborative work in your areas.
And I thought Kelsey's examples did a great job bringing together from professional development, like looking at that workforce capacity and are we making an impact with that? I love the braided funding example shared by Justin and friends as far as at that alignment level. So between some of those ideas that were shared, I think those are nice ways to move forward. The common messaging, Kelsey had shared the nice ISF common messages that are common when we're trying to align the school-based mental health to our PBIS or MTSS framework. I know I shared some from the practices slide with data outcomes, but using some of those common messages with some of the suggested methods is a great next step as well. And then there was one last poll question that we didn't include in polls, that was on her slide. So I'm going to shift back to the shared PowerPoint here. But the last question, extending your reach, deepening your contact, expanding your impact. We didn't put that in a collaboration poll, but I know something that you were having them think about, Kelsey. Is there anything else you would add or share from your success in terms of how you extended that reach across your region with some of those regional partners that you would suggest for folks?
Yeah, I mean, one really simple way is just getting information out. We all seem to have listservs and social media. So just making sure that we're sort of promoting those events across all of those organizations has been one way to extend our reach.
Great. So like we said, I encourage you to keep chatting some of those ideas in the poll so that others who participate in the session or that watch the recording later can see some of those ideas. You identified a lot of good critical friends and partners to reach out to. And those of you I know were mentioning some of the community agency groups or some of our communities partners for school-based mental health. Keeping those, the page that Kelsey mentioned around our integrated system framework includes a lot of tools in the district and, the state and the district implementation guides, full of really good tools for you as you're considering adding some of those partners. And I don't know if you have any other, as far as when you were establishing some critical partners in your regional group, Kelsey, ideas that weren't shared from those examples that you would recommend, or ones that you just want to reinforce that were shared when you're partnering with some of those groups?
Yeah, I think the last thing I just want to reinforce is when our center, our MHTTC Center School Mental Health Supplement was established, we could have very easily sort of siloed the work off and had a completely separate initiative. And I think that would have added a lot to the confusion. And so we were just really intentional that it was our goal to spend some time initially getting to know, doing a needs assessment across the 4 states, finding out who those training and TA entities were, finding out sort of what the needs were, and really thinking, again, intentionally about how we could use and leverage this funding to expand and build on the work that's already happening, as opposed to silo it off into another initiative. I'm always thoughtful of this statement around the burden of alignment and integration shouldn't fall on the shoulders of the implementers. So at whatever stage you're at along that implementation cascade, thinking about how you can do a better job of messaging those multiple initiatives or multiple efforts. So we're not leaving that to our implementers to try to figure out how all of these things fit together. And instead, they're just accessing the information and doing the skill building, but aren't left with that sort of confusing piece about how all of these things fit together. And now I've got to do my PBIS, and now I've got to do my social emotional learning, and now I've got to do my mental health and my restorative justice. Because when we start siloing things based on funding and initiatives, all of that sort of rolls down and then gets replicated when we talk about that symmetry of process, all the way down from, the regional to the state to the service district to the district. So just being really cautious and really intentional about when we have something new, how we are connecting it to existing efforts.
I think that's really important. The district I kept mentioning, I was just with the district team yesterday that makes this completely relevant, but they kept talking about the big win. And at first I thought we were winning something, but what they meant was the alignment of, if, like you said, Kelsey, if something new is coming in for instruction and curriculum, at the district level, helping to align that for the school level so that they're not having to figure that on their own. And that they at least have some options for how that could work. They could still individualize their context, but help and make that connection for them. And that being a district resource or support for them as implementers in the school. And just thought that example was very relevant to some of the things we were talking about, what you just mentioned about the task of alignment is to support those implementers and making sure they have what they need. So I love that point. And just mentioning that at a district level, that's one of the coaching aspects is what can we do at the district level to make sure they have what they need. And it's not placed on the shoulders of the schools who are already sometimes a little overburdened. So with that, I'm going to, and again, I apologize about the technology issues and not being able to respond as readily to some of our Q&A here. I will take the responsibility of going back through the chat and addressing some of the things through files if we need to. You also, I'm going to just share the contact information slides. You are welcome to reach out to Kelsey or myself through the contact slide, since we did have that little hiccup on the technology. And all the resources I know I mentioned from Arch Educator are on our website, as well as Kelsey mentioned some resources and support through those. We will also wrap up with, please complete the evaluation. We just talked to you a little bit about using evaluation data to evaluate impact. And in this conference, I know they do a great job of using the evaluation to try to make it better each year. So please complete that for this session. I know we're about 5 minutes early of stop time, excuse me. So I just want to say thank you for joining us and devoting your time to listening with us. Apologize again for the tech issues. Thank Kelsey for sharing some of her story from her regional experience. And Kelsey, did you have anything to add to close?
I don't think so. Just great opportunity to be with so many of you, and encourage you to reach out to either of us or either of the other folks that have been part of this collaborative effort. If you're looking for more information, I think that's the best part about this PBIS field and this community is I know that I've been able to really grow by reaching out to others and asking questions. So I would just say, don't hesitate to phone a friend.
Agreed. And yes, you're never on your own. That is one of the nice things of the relationships between us nationally and even outside of our country. So I appreciate all the participants we were mentioned this morning that we have to network and collaborate with. So please reach out directly. And like I said, I'll review through the chat and try to respond to anything that was requested in the file share, but a copy of the handout is there for you in the file share. So we'll go ahead and wrap up, and thanks for spending your time with us. Hope you have a great conference.